Hi everyone. Welcome to our video on property binding in Angular. What is property binding? It binds the properties to the target elements, usually our HTML input elements. Property binding is always one way, which means we can set the value to the target element, but we cannot read the value from the target element. Also, you cannot use the property binding to call the function in the target element. Let's see some examples, so that you will get clear idea. First, let's see a simple example. In the component file, we will add a variable as user ID which is equal to username. Now, we will create a text box in template file. Input, within square brackets ID, set the value to user ID. Let's save and see the results in browser. Now you can see a text box. If you inspect the element, you can see the element is created with ID as username. The value username is set as a result of property binding. Now we will make one more change. Instead of square brackets, we will add a keyword, bind, in the template file. Now if you see the value, still as username. So this is another way of binding the properties. In these examples, you would have seen, it just interpolates the values. Then what is the difference between the interpolation and property binding? It's simple. Interpolation allows you to insert the value as just string and it will not allow you to maintain the property data type. But property binding maintains the data type of the property. We will create one more property, disabled in the text box. Now it disabled the input box. Now let's set the value to the property. Let's make disabled as false. Even though we set the value of disabled to false, still it's not enabled. Let's interpolate the value and see how it works. Now we will add interpolation with a variable is disabled. We will add the variable in component file also, is disabled, is equal to, false. Let's save and run the file. Now you can see still the text box is not enabled even though we set the value as false. Go back to the template file and make it as a property binding. Move the disabled property within square bracket and remove the interpolation. Save the file and check in browser. Here we go. The text box is enabled and it's available for us to edit. Now we are able to edit the value. We will set the value to true and see what happens. Save the file. Now you can see in browser, the text box is disabled, so whatever the value we set as Boolean has the effect here in the text box. So from this we understood the difference between interpolation and property binding. Which is interpolation can set only string value, but property binding can set the exact data typed values. Let's try to understand more on this property binding. So far we have set the values to the attributes and called it as property binding. What are we setting really? Is it property or attribute? Let's clear the doubt. Let's take max length value of the text box and set it as normal HTML attribute value without any property binding. We will set the max length of the text box here as 5. Save the file and check in browser. Now we are unable to type after 5 characters. So the max length attribute is working fine. Let's move to the template and make it as property binding. Just move the max length attribute within the square bracket and save the file. Now you can see compilation issue. Cannot bind to max length since it is not a known property of input. What happens here? We have set the right attribute, still we are seeing this issue. It is because we are not setting the attribute, but we are trying to set the property. To understand more clearly, just change the lowercase max length to camel case. Now save the file. Here we go, now we do not see any compilation issues. Let's check in the browser also whether the max length has effect on the text box. I am unable to type after 5 characters, which means it's working fine. So from this we understood that we are not setting the attributes directly, we are setting the attributes through property binding. For simple understanding, whenever you see two-worded attributes, then it should be in camel case for property binding. In this section we understood what is property binding. In next section we will see other types of binding in Angular. Bye.